Econ students. In this video, we will talk about supply curve shifters and how changes in exogenous variables outside of our model can cause our supply curve to either increase or decrease. Now, we're going to be talking about 5 different situations here. Again, we use the term exogenous to describe these variables that are not price and quantity, so they're outside of our variables. And we have things that can actually cause our curve to shift. So we're going to look at each one of these in turn and provide examples for each one. In the problem set, you'll find a similar question to this where you're asked to give examples of how we shift our supply curve and how to use each one of these shifters. So we'll go through one by one. First one we have on our list are changes in technology and input prices. We have taxes and subsidies. We have entry and exit of new producers. We have expectations of future prices. And we have changes in opportunity cost. So let's take a minute and we'll go through each of these examples in turn, starting with technology and input prices. When we make our supply curve, again, we always want to make sure that we have price on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal, and that our supply curve is upward sloping. So there's a relationship between technology and input prices. Typically what we see is as technology improves, so an increase in tech, what we end up seeing is a decrease in our input prices. So input prices are not necessarily the same thing as the market we're looking at. So let's say we're looking at a market for cars. And we're talking about technology for making steel. Steel would be an input price in this case. We're not talking about a change in the price of cars, but what we're talking about in this example is if we have an increase in technology, then our input prices, so in this case steel that goes into making cars, decrease. So what that means is because that input price decreases, what we're going to see is we're actually going to see an increase in the value of cars. So the overall price of making that car, of producing that car, gets lower. So when we see an improvement in technology and we see input prices decrease, we see an increase in supply. And our supply curve shifts to the right. If, on the other hand, we see a decrease in technology, so if something happens and we see a decrease in technology, this will lead to an increase in input prices. And an increase in input prices is going to drive up the cost of the entire market. So if that market, if production of cars just got more expensive, what we're going to see is a decrease in supply, and our shift will shift to the left. So again, another reminder here, when we're talking about input prices, we're not talking about changing the price in this graph. We're talking about changing the price of another piece of what we're making. So if I were to say that the price of cars is changing or the price of cars increased, that would be a change in the quantity supplied, and that wouldn't shift our curve. That would again move us along the curve. But by saying that our input price changed, so in this example, steel is an input for cars. That is an exogenous factor. That is a change in a price outside of the market that we're examining. So increases in technology that decrease our input prices are going to increase our supply, and decreases in technology that are going to raise our input prices are going to decrease our supply. The next shifter we're going to talk about are taxes and subsidies. Price on our vertical, quantity on our horizontal, supply curve upward sloping. Be sure that when you're going through your homework and you're going through your problem sets, always include the labels of your axes on your graphs to make sure that we know what we're talking about and to receive full points for the questions. Now, taxes and subsidies are pretty straightforward, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on them. A tax is going to increase the total cost of our good that we're looking at. So taxes are going to decrease our supply and shift our curve to the left. Subsidies, on the other hand, are a reverse tax. They're a payment. So it's going to make our product less expensive. So a subsidy is going to increase our supply and shift our curve to the right. Again, pretty straightforward. We're going to look at the mechanics next of entry and exit, which is always going to be straightforward as well. So we take this same graph and apply this same concept. Again, we'll walk through the shifts. This is probably one of the most straightforward out of all of our supply curve shifters. If we see entry, we see new producers in the market. So entry, of course, is going to increase supply. The more firms that are in the market, the greater the total supply. So we're going to see a rightward shift in our supply curve. Opposite is true. If we have a lot of firms exiting the market, then we're going to see a decrease in supply. So if we see exit, we're going to see a decrease in supply. And therefore, our supply curve will shift to the left. So this is our entry and exit. The next thing we're going to talk about is expectations. And you may remember that expectations was also a factor, an exogenous variable, that caused our demand curve to shift. And in this scenario, our expectations are going to be a little bit different. So in our demand curve shifters, we talked about expectations of future supply being parts of this pricing variable. Now, in supply curve shifters, what we're talking about here are the expectations of future prices. And the scenario I want us to think of is shopping retail clothing stores. So let's take a look at how this might work. Price vertical, quantity horizontal, upward sloping supply curve. So let's say that we are a retailer and we're looking at the market for blue jeans. We know that we're going to have a sale on blue jeans. Now, let's say I'm the realtor, or the retail worker. Let's say I expect that next week we're going to have a sale. So next week, so what do? Now, if we expect that next week I'm only going to be able to sell my quantity, my supply for, let's say, half of what I normally would, what would I do today while it is still valued at full price? So if we expect next week to be a sale, then today we're going to want to increase our supply. So today we increase supply and we shift this curve to the right. So if we have an expectation of a lower price, we're going to unload as much as we can before that price change occurs. So today we're going to have a increase in supply to get rid of as much as we can. Now, the opposite is true. Let's say that we have a sale going on right now. So if right now is a sale and next week is full price, so next week, sale ends. So right now I'm in a sales period. Well, again, I might want to hold back some of my stock because I can't sell it for as much as I normally would. So if I'm doing that, if I'm holding that stock back, we're going to see a decrease in our supply. So if next week our sale ends, we want to today decrease our supply so that we can save our stock for next week when everything goes back to full price. This is actually something that we've seen used quite frequently in retail, especially if you've worked in retail and been asked to hold some things in the back. This is one of the reasons that we see that practice. So hopefully you can see the difference when we talked about our demand curve. Demand, again, the shifter in that is is an expectation of future supply, whereas shifting the supply curve, it's an expectation of future prices. Very important distinguishing characteristic there. So make sure you put a little star by expectations in both of your shifters on your notes. A couple more things we're going to talk about. Last thing here, we've already discussed how we have technology changing input prices being our first shifter. We discussed taxes and subsidies. We discussed expectations of future prices. We discussed entry and exit of new producers. And the last item that we're going to discuss is changes of opportunity cost. So let's say that we have two items. We're farmers and we can grow either corn or soybeans. And let's say that the market that we're examining is the market for corn. So we are farmers, and Again, bringing this concept back to opportunity cost. Remember that opportunity cost is the value of the next best thing that we're giving up. So if we as farmers can either grow corn or soybeans, we have to make a choice in which one we're going to sell. So in this case, we're looking at the market for corn, and what we want to know is what would happen if I could change the sales price of soybeans, which in this example is our opportunity cost. So let's say initially we can sell either both of these things for $1. Now let's keep in mind an important distinguishing factor. What we're talking about here is sales price. So this is what I would be able to sell each of these items for. So this is not what it cost me to sell them. This is what I can sell them for and the value I can receive. Now, if initially we can sell them each at the same price, then we're relatively indifferent about which one we grow. So again, we're going to have this market here for corn. So the first thing that we're going to do, let's say that the price of soybeans, the selling price of soybeans, goes down. So let's say that instead of selling for $1, now soybeans sell at 75 cents. Well then, people are no longer indifferent about whether they want to grow corn or soybeans. So now there are some people in the market that are going to switch from soybeans because the price decreased, the sales price, and instead they will end up going to corn. So this would be considered an increase in a decrease, excuse me. This is a decrease in opportunity cost, which will lead to an increase in supply of corn. So in other words, my opportunity cost, instead of giving up $1 per bushel, or however soybeans work, instead of giving up $1, now I'm only giving up 75 cents. My opportunity cost just decreased, and we're going to see firms switching from growing soybeans into growing corn. So as a result of that decrease in opportunity cost, we're going to see an increase in supply of corn. Now, the opposite is also true. Let's say now, instead of decreasing the price of soybeans to 75%, instead, we can now sell soybeans for $2. Again, remembering that this is not sales price of corn. This is not our cost. This is what we could receive. So this is our sales price. This is the transaction amount that we receive as the sellers. So we want to make sure that we're growing the one that has the higher sales price. So again, an important distinguishing characteristic between that and cost. So now, if again, originally we could have grown either at, or we could have sold either at $1, we would have been indifferent. But now our opportunity cost, what we are giving up, has just increased. So an increase in our opportunity cost is going to cause a decrease in our supply. So now everybody that's growing corn and only selling it for $1, they are missing out on what they could be earning by selling soybeans. So as their opportunity cost of growing soybeans increases, we're going to see a decrease in the supply of corn. Again, to review, we've had 5 different supply shifters that we've discussed. We've talked about technology and input prices. We've talked about entry and exit of producers. We've talked about taxes and subsidies. We've talked about expectations of future prices. And finally, changes in opportunity cost. Next, we'll be moving forward and putting our supply and demand curves on the same graph and examining how equilibrium prices and quantities are set. Thank you for watching.